If you were to ask Kelly Peters, she lived an incredibly sensible and normal life. In her younger years, she had been more of a live wire, flying to Hawaii and deciding to live there on a random impulse, or working as a bartender to get by, and exploring all that life had to offer her. As she got older, and her wants in life changed, she dedicated herself to her work, earning more than a respectable income in the mortgage industry. But after meeting and marrying her husband Bill, and the birth of her daughter, Sydney, she had wound her life down, choosing to center the little girl she had brought into the world. Family meant everything to Kelly, and she was determined to give Sydney the best chance at life. She wanted Sydney's life to be carefree and nice for as long as possible, and began researching the best places in the world to raise a family. Kelly wanted to make sure that Sydney was away from anyone who would want to hurt her or anyone who could potentially abuse her, and that she could be an active participant in her daughter's life. Finally, after months of heavy research and planning, the Peters settled on moving to Irvine, California. The area was pristine, but most importantly, was ranked as America's safest city, with a population of over 200,000 and the school system being one of the best in the country. Kelly felt that this was the perfect place for her and her family to settle down. When Sydney was old enough to start attending school, Kelly made it a point to be an active participant in that as well. She felt that as a mom, it was her duty to make sure that her child, and subsequently the other children in the community, were being taken care of when they went to school. If a teacher needed more supplies, she was there to help her out. If a child needed more attention, she was more than willing to talk to their parents. Whatever the school needed, she was more than happy to provide. Kelly became such a regular fixture at Plaza Vista School that eventually she became head of the Parent-Teacher Association, as well as the driving force behind the public school's after-hours program. Everyone adored Kelly, from student to faculty, as she genuinely worked within not only her child's best interest, but the best interest for all the children at the school. She wasn't the type of parent who would insist that her daughter get special treatment because of her actions, and she never leveraged her position to her daughter's benefit. Instead, she was earnest and hardworking, acknowledging that her daughter would have to try just as hard as the teachers were working if she was to get good grades. After working with the school for 6 years, Kelly was just a part of the Plaza Vista tapestry. She was reliable, hardworking, and caring. But on a random Wednesday afternoon in 2011, the unthinkable would happen. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Today, we are going to be covering the case of Jill and Kent Easter, two high-powered attorneys who became so incensed by a perceived slight by the PTA president at their child's school, they attempted to destroy her life. This case is one of the more ridiculous cases we have covered, and serves as a bit of respite for the intense and often harrowing topics we cover. This video, like the vast majority we cover, came in for your request by our subscribers and patrons. If there is a case you would like to see covered or a topic you would like to see examined, let me know by leaving a comment down below or emailing me at dreading.official@gmail.com. My brother and I are currently going through all of the requests now and covering as much as we can, so if we don't get to your request immediately, know that we will. With all of that said, let us begin. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. When I decided to pursue making true crime content full-time, I used Skillshare to help me learn how to edit videos, write engaging scripts, and make content in the most time-effective ways. And when I hired my brother to help me, he took the very same classes. But Skillshare is so much more than just a platform to help you pursue new creative endeavors like in photography, film and video editing, and illustration. They also have career-focused classes that help you organize your life and set your life up in a way that benefits you. Their classes on productivity and time management have been a lifesaver for me, as someone who often struggles with focus and organization. I particularly loved Productivity Today, Managing Attention in the Digital Age by Kevin Sisker, and the Productivity Masterclass, Principles and Tools to Boost Your Productivity by Ali Abdal. If you're one of the countless people at a crossroads looking to start a new career or simply organize your life by organizing it in a more efficient manner, I guarantee that Skillshare has a class for you. Thankfully, Skillshare is partnering with me today to offer the first 1,000 people to use my code DREADING, a full month of learning absolutely free. That's a full month with unlimited access to all of Skillshare's courses on everything you could think of. I can't recommend Skillshare more, as I genuinely use it to make the content you see before you today. Thank you again to Skillshare for continuing to partner with me and make this job feasible. And now, let's get into the video. On February 16, 2011, Kelly had been asked to take over watching a class for another teacher when suddenly, one of the school administrators hurriedly rushed in. They informed Kelly that a police officer was there, asking for her by name, and Kelly immediately began to panic. She knew her daughter had to be all right, but her husband was at work. Had there been an accident? Was he all right? What hospital was he taken to? Her mind began to race, thinking about the worst things imaginable. She sprinted to the office, fully convinced that she was about to get the worst news of her life. But upon arriving, Officer Charles Shaver informed her that as far as he was aware, her husband was fine. He was there to search her car. Officer Shaver was responding to a call that had come in at 1:15 p.m., seemingly by a concerned father who claimed to have seen Kelly driving around the school erratically, as if she was on pills.
Irvine Police.
Yes, hi. I was calling because my daughter is a student at Plaza Vista Elementary School, and I'm concerned one of the parent volunteers there may be under the influence or using drugs. I was just had to go over to the school, and I saw a car driving very erratically, and as it continued on into the parking lot of the school, and I was going there, and I just had to look to see who it was and what was going on, and then I saw them get out, and it looked like they had put something away in their car and behind their seat with some drugs. And they were all over the place, and then they went into the school, and I recognized that the woman is one of the parent volunteers for the after school program, and I'm concerned that there are drugs at the school.
So you specifically saw her place something behind her seat?
Yeah, it looked like she had some like pills or something.
Okay, what is your name?
My name is Jay.
Jay?
BJ.
And what's your last name?
Chandrasekhar.
How do you spell that?
CHANDRASEKHR.
Okay. And what's your phone number where we can reach you?
949.
And do you know this person's name?
I think her name is Kelly.
Kelly?
Yeah, and it's a white PT Cruiser.
After hearing why the officer was there, Kelly laughed. Here she had been so concerned that her husband had passed away, and now this obviously fake allegation was being made against her. She had been working at 115, as noted on multiple security cameras around the school, in which multiple of her colleagues could attest to, and she didn't participate in recreational drug use. Whatever was going on, it clearly had nothing to do with her. But Officer Shaver informed her that he would still need to take a look at her car just to be sure. Kelly laughed off the accusation and happily agreed to let the officer search her car. However, once she unlocked the doors to her PT Cruiser, Officer Shaver immediately found what he was looking for. In the pouch located behind the driver's seat, the pouch that her daughter usually filled with her school supplies after class, was a Ziploc bag with 17 grams of weed in it, a ceramic pipe, and 2 small, easy-dose pill pouch baggies of Percocet and Vicodin. Officer Shaver pulled the drugs out of the car and showed them to Kelly, who immediately stopped joking about the situation. A new worst-case scenario played out before her. A massive amount of drugs have just been found in her car, at her work, at an elementary school. She was going to go to jail. The story was going to be all over the news, and all of her hard work to improve the school would be ignored. She just thought about her daughter, just inside with all of her friends, and how embarrassed she would be. Kelly, now sobbing, informed Shaver that the drugs were not hers, and that she had never seen them before, and that she had no idea how they'd gotten there. She once again repeated that she had been at the school since a little after 12 p.m., and that multiple people would testify that she had been on school grounds, not driving under the influence, as the anonymous caller had said. She offered to do a drug test to prove her innocence, which Shaver took her up on. He put the drugs in the trunk of his police car and asked the school if there was a room that he and Peters could use. After finding an empty conference room, he ran every drug test he knew on her, and she passed with flying colors. Though still sobbing and in the midst of a panic attack, she was clearly sober. He followed up with her peers and interviewed nearly all of the school administrators, who once again stated that Peters had been on school grounds when the call came in and was very much sober. The more questions he asked, the less clear the situation became. Shaver asked if he could search the family's small apartment nearby. If Peter did have enough of a drug habit to have weed, Percocet, and Vicodin in her car, there had to be evidence of it at her home. Again, Kelly agreed to this search, but stated that if someone had broken into her car to frame her, she wouldn't be surprised if they had broken into her home as well. The apartment was completely clean, no sign of any drug paraphernalia or evidence that any drugs had been done in the apartment. Shaver once again questioned neighbors, asking if they knew Kelly and had any complaints about her. But once again, everyone who lived around the Peters family claimed that Kelly was a lovely, caring person with no sign of any drug issues. Shaver was a relatively logical man. He knew that whenever a person was caught with drugs, especially the amount that Kelly had been caught with, they would feign innocence. He had arrested other people in the area for possession, soccer moms, football coaches, and the like. But something about Kelly stood out to him. There was no way that she could have this significant of a drug habit without anyone knowing. And there was no way, had she been hiding a drug habit that well, that she would have simply left 17 grams of pot, Vicodin, and Percocet in her car in plain view. He told her that night in the family's apartment that he wasn't going to arrest her, and he didn't believe that the drugs he had found belonged to her. Instead, he was going to take her and her daughter's fingerprints for DNA and test the drugs they had found in the car. Should their DNA be found on the drugs, she would be arrested and charged. If not, they would look at the case from the standpoint of her being framed. The second Shaver mentioned the potential of the drugs being planted and herself being framed, she knew exactly what had happened. It was then she introduced Officer Shaver to the woman who had been dead set on destroying her life, Jill Easter. To everyone who knew Jill Easter, she was an overachiever. She was the type of person who, when she set her mind to something, she got it, and she got it in record time. In school, she had gotten all A's, and had gotten into Berkeley to study law. She had graduated with high marks, but after meeting her husband Kent, while working at a Palo Alto law firm, she had retired to be a stay-at-home mom. But she took it incredibly seriously. She didn't want to be the kind of mom who let herself go after having kids. If she was going to be a parent, she was going to ace that as well. Her days were immensely regimented, with multiple workouts, Starbucks, hair appointments, all carefully placed within her children's schedule. But, unlike Kelly, Jill was the kind of parent who took any issue her child was going through personally. A year prior to Kelly's car being searched by the police, Jill had come to pick up her son from the after-school enrichment program, which Kelly was the volunteer director of. On that particular day, Jill waited impatiently outside for her son to come out, but he didn't appear to be with the rest of the kids. He had been slower than the rest of the class to line up, and Kelly had accidentally left him at the tennis court. He was left behind for less than 5 minutes, as the tennis instructor saw him waiting and brought him back inside. But when Jill found out what had happened, she was irate. She approached Kelly and immediately began to berate her. It seemed to her that what had occurred was less of an accident and more of a deliberate endangering of her child. Kelly tried to explain what happened, and in the midst of being dressed down by the former lawyer, she said that she had missed Jill's son because he was slower than the rest of the group, meaning that the boy was physically slower at grabbing his things. But Jill thought differently. The moment that Kelly said Jill's son was slower, she believed that the after-school care worker was slighting her son's mental capabilities and calling him dumb. She began to once again berate her, and then began to make the claim that the tennis instructor had likely sexually assaulted her son in the moments that they had been left alone. This claim came out of nowhere and had no basis in logic. Again, it had been a matter of a couple minutes, and her son didn't appear upset or injured. But Jill didn't care about that. Eventually, after apologizing and trying to clarify that she hadn't meant to leave her son outside, that her son hadn't been sexually assaulted, and that her son wasn't mentally slow, Kelly turned to go back inside. Jill continued to verbally assault the mother, stating that she had no idea how she could sleep at night with how evil she was, unaware that she was the one antagonizing Kelly. But from that moment on, Jill became obsessed with destroying Kelly's life. The next day, Jill made a formal complaint to the school. She claimed that her son had been crying hysterically after being locked out of the school for 19 minutes. She claimed that this was done intentionally to her son by Kelly, who was singling him out for her own vindictive purposes. In Jill's letter to the school officials, she wrote, "Kelly told me that she blames my son because he is slow, and he often gets left behind because it's hard to wait for him. For the record, my son is very intelligent, mature, and athletic, and has successfully participated in many ACE classes. He is receiving good grades and has earned many awards this year. He is not mentally or physically slow by any standard." Kelly gave her version of events to the district ACE director, who also interviewed various witnesses to the incident, the tennis coach who Jill had claimed was a predator, and other school officials. The investigation was opened and shut within days, and it was found that, quote, nothing had happened to Jill's son, and he had simply been left outside for 5 minutes, unquote. But that didn't satisfy Jill. She felt, for some reason, that Kelly was a danger to have around the children. The PTA president had been much too blasé about leaving her son outside with a stranger, and her continued assertion that it wasn't a big deal was abhorrent. She began to talk to parents at the school about Kelly and encouraged them to complain about her. At a certain point, she even made flyers, defaming Kelly and saying that she was a danger to the children. However, most of the parents knew Kelly and knew how much the kids adored her. She had helped multiple parents with their own kids, providing after-school care and different enrichment classes. These flyers were quickly given to the school, and Kelly didn't know what to do. She didn't want to engage with Jill any further, as the first incident had left her in tears. The next week, Jill called the principal of Plaza Vista School and told her that Kelly shouldn't be allowed around the children. She admitted to passing out the flyers that defamed Kelly, but claimed that they had nothing but facts on them, so it wasn't defamation. When the principal reminded Jill that the school had a policy about parent behavior and that any adult who was on the campus had to engage civilly with one another, Jill informed her that both she and her husband were lawyers and that they would be more than willing to fight this battle in court. Following her conversation with the principal, Jill filed a police report claiming that Peters was specifically targeting and abusing her 6-year-old son, but within a day, the case was shut as there was no evidence that any abuse had taken place. She requested a restraining order, claiming that Peters was, quote, harassing and stalking myself and my 6-year-old son, and had threatened to kill her. The court threw it out immediately, as again, there was no evidence. But Jill wasn't done yet. She made good on her threat to the principal, stating that her and her lawyer husband would be willing to pursue the matter in court, and they filed a civil suit. The suit claimed that their son had been the victim of false imprisonment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He had suffered extreme and severe mental anguish at Kelly's hand, and they were seeking damages. In response, Kelly was forced to get a lawyer, who was able to argue the suit down to the point that the Easters dropped the suit. At the end of their months of abuse, Kelly was tired. She had been defamed and attacked, but thankfully the school stood behind her, and in 2011, everything had seemed to die down. She hadn't heard from the Easters. As far as she knew, they had dropped their misguided attacks on her, until that day. It was nearly a year to the day of the original incident, and Kelly informed the police of the lengths Jill had gone to destroy her life. Jill's name wasn't the only one she gave to the police. She also informed them of another parent who might have had a motive to frame her, a man who had regularly behaved erratically. He was the father of one of the students at the school, and though he had never displayed any negative emotions towards Kelly, he had run for PTA president against her and lost. And given that the 911 call had been a man who midway through seemed to change his voice to appear Indian, the police thought he was a likely suspect. As the investigation waited for forensics to process the drugs and see if any DNA was left in or on the bags, they focused primarily on the 911 call. They traced the call and found out that it had originated from the ground floor business office of the Island Hotel in Newport Beach. They then pulled the hotel surveillance footage for the day and waited to see who would plant the false tip. But they didn't see the PTA hopeful, nor did they see Jill Easter. Instead, they saw Kent Easter, Jill's lawyer husband who worked a few hundred feet from the Island Hotel. What the man on the surveillance footage confirmed to be Kent via the Plaza Vista school principal, the investigation began to focus on the Easters. Police tailed the couple wherever they went, figuring out the pair's routine and habits. They obtained Easter's phone records and found that between 2:37 a.m. and 4:21 a.m., the day the drugs had been planted, the couple had been awake and exchanged 15 text messages. Because of those texts, they were able to place the couple. Jill's iPhone had been pinging off the cell phone tower nearest the Easter's home, showing that she was likely at home. Kent, however, had a BlackBerry, which had pinged off of the tower nearest the Peters apartment complex, where her PT Cruiser had been parked in the outdoor lot. It was clear that the drugs had been planted by Kent, and that Jill had been part of the nefarious plot. But, as the two were both apprised to the legal system, having worked as lawyers, the investigators knew that they would have to carefully plan their next move. If the Easters became aware of the investigation, they would close ranks, get their stories straight, and likely destroy any evidence that could be used against them. With that in mind, the officers planned to execute a search warrant for the couple's home, as well as a warrant for Kent Easter's office at the same time, eliminating the possibility for any evidence to be destroyed. On March 4th, nearly a month after the drug planting, Kent pulled into the reserved parking space for his office and was approached by the lead detective, who had deliberately dressed down for the occasion. His plan, as it were, was to appear as if he wasn't taking this case seriously. Given Kent's schooling and reputation as a lawyer, trying to purposely outwit him would likely annoy him and make him less likely to talk, but catering to his ego, making him feel as if he holds all the cards and that the detectives are easily duped, would make him feel comfortable talking to them. They spoke for some time, with the detective asking him leading and open-ended questions, which Kent happily responded to. He told the detectives about his family's issue with Kelly unprompted, how she had maliciously locked his son out of the school for upwards of an hour, how he had been sobbing hysterically when he was found by his mother, and how Kelly berated his wife and his son for being mentally incompetent. He claimed that this instance was long behind him, though, as they decided to, quote, not press the issue, unquote. The officers began to focus more on Kelly, asking him if he had ever met her. Had he ever been to her home? Did he know what her car looked like? Kent became agitated, repeatedly saying he had no idea what they were talking about, and that despite his negative opinion of the woman, he wouldn't be able to pick her out in a crowd. Eventually, the officers told Kent what they knew. They informed him that they knew he had been at Kelly's apartment the morning the drugs were planted. They knew that he had planned this with his wife, and they were there to search his office, and almost immediately they found evidence that he had some part in the crime, as in the back of his car, they found diet pills. More importantly, they found pills in the same easy-dose pill pouch bags as had been used to frame Kelly. Beyond the pill pouches and the cell phone pings, the forensics on the drugs had finally come back, and it wasn't a match to Kelly. Instead, it was found that the bag had Jill's DNA on it, and one of the pills had his fingerprints. But the case was far from over. With both Jill and Kent aware that they were being investigated for framing Kelly, you would think that they would be on their best behavior. Kent was made aware that they had been followed by the police for weeks at that point, but seemingly didn't make his wife aware of that fact, as she was caught on multiple occasions seeing Glenn Gomez, a married firefighter. After seeing Gomez leave the Easter home one afternoon, the police pulled him over and asked him about his relationship with Jill. He informed them that despite both being married, they had been carrying out a large-scale affair for over 2 years. He showed them proof of their trips together, explicit photos that they had shared with each other, and incredibly descriptive sexual texts. After talking for a while, the police determined that Glenn didn't really know a lot about Jill and her life, and wasn't involved in the harassment campaign she had forged against Kelly. She had told him various fabrications, but they only really saw each other when they wanted to have sex, so he hadn't caught on to any of her lies. But they felt he could still be a help to them. They asked him if he would be willing to wear a wire next time he met up with Jill. It was possible, they said, that Jill could be completely innocent and this could help her. Glenn agreed cautiously, not wanting to get more involved, but hoping that everything they had told him about Jill was untrue. The next time Glenn met up with Jill, they went to a park with their children. She told them that he was a park ranger, and as the kids played, he asked her questions about what was going on. He told her that the police had been calling him and asking questions about her, but he didn't know what to do. Jill stated that she was in trouble, but she wouldn't give any details. All she would say was that the investigation was putting her husband's job at risk, and if he lost his job, she would lose it all. She hinted to Glenn that she wanted him to help in some way. She repeatedly stated that she wanted someone to come in and save her from the mess, to take her away and make the problems disappear, but Glenn didn't pick up on her hints, instead saying that maybe they should keep their distance until the investigation winds down. At that point, according to Glenn, the cool, laid-back, loving Jill that he knew completely changed. She accused him of abandoning her when things got tough, and stated outright that he didn't love her. She had given him everything, but he refused to help her, she said. She began to yell at him at the park in front of her children, and after they separated, she broke up with him. But, like previously with Kelly, she didn't stop there. She showed up at his home and confronted his wife, telling her about their years-long affair. She printed out photos that he had sent to her and put them in his mailbox for her to find, and even went so far as to send emails to the dance studio that his wife worked at, detailing their affair in vivid detail, including intimate pictures and making sure as many people knew about his infidelity as possible. Despite the affair, the couple was a united front against the charges that were pending against them. They both hired 2 high-powered lawyers who fought the police tirelessly. Because Kent was a lawyer, he claimed his phone could not be searched because it had privileged information on it. If the police looked through his texts and his records, who's to say that they wouldn't use that information in court, completely breaking attorney-client privilege? Beyond that, they also fought that the couple's conversations were likewise deemed inadmissible due to spousal privilege. They bogged the police down with needless documents, drowning them in paperwork with the hope that they would just drop the case. Kelly waited, hoping that the Easters would be arrested, that their phones would be searched and the evidence would be found. But as far as she could tell, nothing had happened. Instead, her mental health and well-being began to decline. She would obsessively check her car, making sure that it was clean. She was paranoid that her doors were always unlocked, and would check them throughout the day. And when she saw Jill at school, she would get so nervous that she thought she would pass out. It wouldn't be until prosecutor Christopher Duff was handed the case over a year later that the couple would be arrested. The Easters were being charged with conspiring to plant drugs in Peter's car, the twisted culmination of a year-long vendetta against the school volunteer. They were quickly out on bail, but their mugshots were all over the news. The case quickly picked up national attention, with many people commenting on how these two seemingly established individuals did everything in their power to take down someone over a misunderstanding. Following his arrest, Kent was fired from the law firm he had just been made partner at, and given the felony indictment, he would never be able to work as a lawyer again. The case should have been open and shut. Their DNA on the drugs, their cell phone data, and the years-long harassment campaign should have been more than enough to put them away. But again, the pair had worked in the legal system, so they knew how to work the system, and they decided that their best bet was to be tried separately. If they were tried separately, Kent would likely blame Jill, and Jill would likely blame Kent. They would willingly bury their partner and twist the evidence to make it appear as if they were less culpable. If they were allowed to use this tactic, it would be likely that neither would be found guilty, which they were relying on. But the court saw through their strategy and denied them separate trials. But as the husband and wife had separate attorneys, they would resolve the matter differently. Jill would, in 2013, agree to plead guilty to a felony count of false imprisonment by fraud or deceit. She would be sentenced to 120 days in jail, plus 100 hours at a local soup kitchen. Meanwhile, Kent would go to trial on the grounds that he had no control in his marriage, and his wife had forced him to plant the drugs in Kelly's car. The successful litigator who had graduated from Stanford in 3 years, been made partner at one of the top law firms, and earned over $400,000 a year, would present himself as an emasculated patsy. His wife had berated him, deceived him, bludgeoned him with guilt. He was completely powerless against her, and only acted because of her. In order to prove his case, he showed an email in court that Jill had sent to him nearly a month after the incident. The subject line of the email read, "Need to get serious," and the email included a detailed account of what she wanted to happen to Kelly. She wanted Kent to get Kelly's background checked. She wanted her arrested and slapped with a restraining order. She wanted to sue Peters, the school district, the school board, and the Public Schools Foundation, and she wanted action by the very next day. The email itself ended with the statement, "Why are we letting this no one abuse our son and trash our family?" He provided more emails, showing how focused on Kelly his wife was, and how he, on multiple occasions, tried to calm her down. She repeatedly berated him as she had Kelly and Glenn, stating he didn't care for her and wasn't protecting his family the way a man was supposed to. He also claimed, while on the stand, that the night the drugs had been planted, he had been at home, recovering from surgery, and was unaware that Jill had even planted the drugs until the next day when she asked him to call the police. In this defense, it seemed, worked, or at least worked enough to leave the jury hung. However, after years of abuse, the prosecution was determined to retry the case as soon as possible, and with the retrial, the prosecution found out one shocking piece of evidence that they had overlooked. There are 3 total ways in which one's cell phone can be traced to their location: when they ping against the nearest tower during calls, when texts are exchanged, and when automatic data checks monitor the device's health. Most cases rely on where they ping, and the other 2 methods are only looked at when that fails to come up with a reliable answer. In this case, because the pings had placed the 2 phones apart, it appeared on the surface that only one of the Easters had planted drugs in the car. However, upon further examination of the other 2 location checks, it was found that both phones had been present outside of Kelly's house the morning the drugs were planted. With that piece of information, he was found guilty. In response, Jill told her husband that he should kill himself to avoid jail. That way, she could collect his $500,000 life insurance policy. When he rejected her advice, she then said they should go on the run and leave the country, both with and then without the kids, and later stated she would kill herself, as she didn't want to live a life with him if he was no longer able to practice law and take care of her. God. Oh my God. Now see, this is where Jill gets rad, because Jill apparently don't take no fucking prisoners. He was sentenced to a measly 180 days in prison, as well as 100 hours of community service. Following both their sentences, the couple divorced. The divorce proceedings were filled with accusations of abuse on both ends, with Jill claiming Kent had a years-long drinking problem stemming from his fraught relationship to his parents, who hated her for not being Catholic. Meanwhile, Kent accused Jill of routinely assaulting him, and on one occasion pepper spraying him. After the divorce, Jill changed her name to Eva Everhart and appeared on an episode of Dr. Phil where she claimed that Kelly had been the aggressor the entire time and that she was blameless in the entire ordeal. When Dr. Phil pushed back on her claims, citing the court record and the evidence against her, she claimed it was doctored and not true. So that is about where the case wraps up. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you for watching. I hope you have an excellent day, and remember to stay safe.